He was a man everyone wanted to be, articulate, intellectually grounded, the kind of actor who could disappear into a stammer or reappear as a spy. At 49, he won an Oscar. He'd played leads in some of the biggest franchises of the 2010s. He had it all figured out. But somewhere between the red carpets and the streaming wars, something shifted. Not a scandal, not a public meltdown. Something quieter. Something that happens to almost every actor, but nobody talks about it. This is the story of how one of the most respected actors of his generation learned what it means to age in an industry that never wanted him to. It's 2023. Colin Firth is 63 years old, and the roles are different now. For decades, he commanded leading roles. Not the flashy superhero types, but the intelligent, morally complex characters that launch him as a serious actor. The kind of parts that build a career on restraint and nuance. But in the last few years, those roles have become harder to find. Studios want younger men in the lead. They want franchise stars with social media followings. They want box office certainty. Firth hasn't disappeared. He's still working. A role here, a supporting part there, a Netflix series, a smaller franchise entry. But the trajectory is unmistakable to anyone paying attention. He's shifted from being the lead to being the supporting actor, from carrying films to enhancing them. And in an industry that measures success by how big your part is, that's not a lateral move. It feels like a loss. The irony is sharp. The very qualities that built his reputation, his gravitas, his ability to convey complexity through stillness, his intellectual approach to character, are now less marketable than they've ever been. Studios market youth. They market virality. They market franchises built for 18 to 35-year-old audiences. And Firth, no matter how skilled, no longer fits that box. This isn't a personal tragedy. This is a professional one. And it's happened to hundreds of actors before him. But for those who've been at the top, it can feel like the only story that matters. Colin Firth was born in 1960 in Hampshire, England, not London, not a theatrical family, not groomed for stardom from birth. His father was a professor of literature. His mother was a schoolteacher. The house was intellectual, arts-focused, but not showbiz. There was no family connection to the industry, no young stage appearances, no obvious pathway to Hollywood. What there was, instead, was curiosity, and a particular kind of British reserve, the kind that teaches a child to listen more than talk, to observe before acting, to find meaning in restraint rather than expression. Firth trained at the Drama Centre London in the 1980s, one of the most rigorous acting schools in the world. It wasn't the kind of training that teaches you to be charming or charismatic. It taught the opposite. It taught you to strip away ego and find truth in a character, no matter how uncomfortable. It was a kind of training that shaped serious actors, not movie stars. His early career reflected this foundation. Television roles in British dramas, Tumbledown, Another Country, parts that required subtlety and emotional control. He wasn't the flashy lead. He was the actor who made you believe what he was feeling through the smallest shift in his expression. He was the actor who understood that sometimes saying nothing is more powerful than saying everything. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, he had a reputation in British television, but he was still a character actor, not yet a star. Still building, still learning his craft in relative obscurity. The shift came gradually, then all at once. In 1995, Pride and Prejudice aired on the BBC. It was a television miniseries, not a film. It was adapted from literature, not blockbuster source material. By all accounts, it shouldn't have made anyone a star. But Firth's portrayal of Mr. Darcy, withdrawn, then transforming, all conveyed through expression and stillness, became iconic. The performance circulated far beyond British television. It became a cultural touchstone. For the first time, the role started changing. Film producers were calling. Hollywood was interested. The shy, intellectual actor from Hampshire was suddenly in demand. The English Patient in 1996 put him on the international map. Then came Mamma Mia in 2008, a departure into lightness and spectacle, but it worked. Love Actually had already made him a fixture in British romantic comedies, films that played around the world and kept his name in circulation. He was becoming the thinking person's movie star. Not an action hero, not a romantic idol in the conventional sense, but something more interesting. A man who could convey complexity and restraint while still being engaging on screen. By the 2000s, he was getting leading roles in significant films. Fever Pitch, Where the Truth Lies, A Single Man in 2009, which earned him a Golden Globe nomination and established him as a dramatic heavyweight capable of anchoring a serious film about identity and grief. The industry had recognized what the Drama Centre London training had taught. Firth was a serious actor, not just a face, but a craft. Then came 2010 and The King's Speech. It wasn't a sure thing. Historical dramas don't always find audiences. The story of a stammering king finding his voice through an unconventional speech therapist could have been a prestige piece that nobody saw. But something about the film, something about Firth's performance, specifically, caught the public imagination in a way that serious films often don't. The film became a phenomenon. It won Best Picture. Firth was nominated for Best Actor. And at 49 years old, in the kind of moment that defines careers, he won. An Oscar win at 49 is unusual. Most actors who win at that age have already had massive careers. They're being recognized for a lifetime of work and a perfect moment converging. Firth's win felt different. It felt like validation that a serious, intellectually grounded actor could still command the biggest stage in industry. That you didn't need to be a franchise superhero or a matinee idol to be recognized at the highest level. For a moment, it seemed like he'd reached a new plateau. Leading roles in serious films, awards recognition, the kind of career trajectory that allows an actor to choose projects based on artistic merit rather than desperation. And then, almost immediately, the industry began to change in ways that would affect not just Firth, but his entire generation of actors. After the Oscar, the roles did continue. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, in 2011, a Cold War spy thriller that let him inhabit a character of restrained brilliance. But it underperformed at the box office. It was a kind of serious, adult-oriented film that used to find audiences. Increasingly, it didn't. Then came Kingsman in 2014. Kingsman was different from what had come before. It was a stylish action spy film, a franchise starter, less interested in restraint and more interested in spectacle. Firth played the mentor figure, the older agent, dignified and controlled, training the younger lead. It was a brilliant performance in a fun film. It worked, and crucially, it was a franchise. There would be sequels. There would be a built-in audience. There would be stability. But there's a cost of franchise work that doesn't get discussed much. You become associated with those films. Your identity in the public imagination becomes linked to that character, that franchise, that role. For younger actors, this can be a springboard to other things. For older actors, it can become a box. You're the mentor figure. You're the established presence. You're there to lend gravitas to the younger leads. Firth did Kingsman, The Golden Circle in 2017. Kingsman, the Secret Service prequel in 2021. The films made money. He was working, but the trajectory was subtle and unmistakable. He was no longer the lead. He was a supporting star, the one who showed up to elevate scenes, to provide weight, then made space for the younger protagonist to carry the story forward. Around the same time, the entire industry shifted beneath him. The 2010s saw seismic shifts in how films and television were made and consumed. Streaming platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV+, started producing their own content and competing with traditional studios for audiences. Social media became the primary way young audiences discovered actors. Marvel and DC franchises built entirely around interconnected universes, owned by the same corporate parents, started to dominate the box office. These weren't small changes. They fundamentally altered what the industry valued in actors. Suddenly, a 55-year-old actor with prestigious awards history, but no Instagram, following was less marketable than a 25-year-old with 5 million TikTok followers and no acting experience. Streaming platforms wanted original content built around young leads with built-in audiences. Studios wanted franchise properties that could sustain for decades, which meant young actors who could play the same role for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. The kind of roles that sustained Firth's career, the serious, adult-oriented dramas, the intelligent character pieces, the leading men in films aimed at audiences over 40, became harder to fund. Studios saw them as risky, not franchise-based, not built-in audiences, not on social media, not young enough to sustain for multiple films. Firth kept working. He appeared in The Mercy in 2018, a biographical drama, a voice role in animated films. Television. The BBC series A Staircase in 2022, a prestigious limited series that earned critical acclaim but wasn't a massive cultural event. These were good projects. They were serious work. But they were smaller stages than what had come before. By the late 2010s, the pattern had become clear. The leading roles were drying up, not because Firth had lost his talent or his ability to command a screen, but because the industry no longer made films the way it used to. The architecture of the film business had changed, and he'd been built for an architecture that was becoming obsolete. This is where the tragedy of this story lives. Not in scandal or public failure, but in something more subtle, in the realization that no matter how good you are at what you do, the industry doesn't necessarily care anymore. An actor like Firth had done everything right. He'd trained seriously. He'd built a reputation for excellence. He'd chosen artistic projects. He'd earned an Oscar through legitimate merit. He'd been respectful and professional. And still, through no fault of his own, through forces entirely outside his control, the kinds of roles he built a career on became scarcer year by year. The parts that remain are good parts. Supporting roles in quality projects. Television work that's prestigious. But they're not the parts that have your name above the title. They're not the parts you carry. They're not the parts that define a career. And for an actor who'd spent decades perfecting the art of carrying a film, that's a particular kind of loss. It's not the loss of success. It's the loss of centrality. It's the loss of being the one everyone came to see. It's aging into a role you never auditioned for. It's 2024. Colin Firth is 64 years old. He's still working. There's a film here, a streaming project there. The roles are often secondary, often prestigious, but secondary nonetheless. He's become the actor you see and think, oh, that's good casting. Recognizing his talent, his presence, his ability to elevate a scene. But he's not the one whose name brings audiences to theaters. He's not the one the film is built around. This has forced a kind of recalibration that most actors never have to face. Or rather, most actors face it, but don't talk about it openly. What do you do when the industry no longer needs you in the same way? When the roles that once defined you aren't being written anymore? When you're still skilled, still relevant, still capable of excellent work, but the architecture of the industry has shifted beneath your feet. Some actors fight it. Some get bitter. Some step away entirely. Firth, by all public accounts, has taken a different approach. He's accepted it, not with resignation, but with a kind of realistic dignity. He's continued to work on projects that interest him rather than projects that promise the biggest paycheck or the most visibility. He's become, in a sense, a working actor again. Someone who acts because he loves the craft, not because he's chasing a particular kind of role or status. The shift is real, though. A man who played leading roles in major films now shows up in supporting capacity in quality projects. That's not nothing. That's a genuine change in trajectory, in how the industry perceives him, and in what opportunities are available to him. Colin Firth's story is not unique. It's the story of dozens of serious actors from his generation, the ones who built careers on intelligence and craft rather than blockbuster appeal. As the industry shifted toward franchises, youth, and social media followings, they became increasingly sidelined, not because they lost their talent, because the industry stopped valuing what they offered. Ralph Fiennes is still working, still brilliant, but he's in supporting roles in major films, not leading them. Michael Fassbender, slightly younger, has managed to sustain more leading roles, partly through franchise work, X-Men, Assassin's Creed, but even has had to recalibrate. Gary Oldman actually experienced a resurgence later in life, winning an Oscar at 60 for a character role. But he's an exception that proves the rule. Most actors Firth's age aren't getting those kind of opportunities. The uncomfortable truth that the industry doesn't like to acknowledge is this. Once you age out of the demographic that studios market to, the career changes. It doesn't end, but it transforms. You become a different kind of actor in a different kind of role structure. For Firth, this has meant accepting that leading man is probably not going to be part of his identity anymore, that the peak of his career, measured in lead roles, box office appeal, and industry prominence, has passed, that he's now in the second act of professional life, where the rewards are different even if the work can still be meaningful. Here's what's interesting about Firth's particular response to this shift. He hasn't become bitter. He hasn't waged a public campaign to get younger roles or complain about ageism in the industry. Even though ageism in Hollywood is real and structural, he simply accepted the reality and continued working within it. In some ways, this echoes back to what made him such an effective actor in the first place. His ability to convey meaning through restraint, to find dignity in the unsaid. He's applied that same skill to navigating a professional loss. But there's a question worth asking about this grace. Is it strength or is it something else? Is accepting the loss of leading roles a sign of wisdom and professional maturity? Or is it a sign that even someone at the top of their craft eventually has to accept the industry's judgment? Firth would probably say both. You accept what you cannot change. You find meaning and satisfaction in the work that remains. You use the authority and experience you built to elevate projects and younger collaborators. You recognize that a career is long, and not every chapter is the same. That's a mature response. It's also unavoidably a response to loss. What Firth's story ultimately illustrates is how individual talent and industry structure are not the same thing. You can be an excellent actor, arguably one of the best of your generation, and still experience your opportunities shrink due to forces entirely outside your control. The industry changes, demographics shift, what's marketable changes, and suddenly, the roles that sustain your career are being written for different actors, younger actors, actors with different kinds of appeal. This is not unique to Firth. It's a systemic issue in entertainment, where value is determined not by merit, but by marketability, age, social media following, and demographic appeal. The irony is that someone as skilled and respected as Firth, someone who could absolutely carry a serious drama and make it excellent, is less marketable to studios than someone with a following and a willingness to franchise themselves. But the inverse is also true. Because he built his reputation on intelligence and craft rather than youth or charisma, he's aged more gracefully in the industry than many of his peers. He's not desperately clinging to leading roles that don't exist anymore. He's found a way to stay relevant through quality supporting work and television. He's adapted. It hasn't been easy. It's probably required accepting things about how the industry values actors that he might prefer not to accept, but he's adapted. Colin Firth's career arc is a story about excellence meeting reality. It's about a talented, serious actor who did everything right, trained well, made smart choices, earned the highest recognition, and still found that the ground shifted beneath him, not because of anything he did wrong, but because the industry itself changed. His story is also, unavoidably, a story about aging in a culture obsessed with youth, about relevance and visibility, about what happens when you're no longer the central figure in your own industry. So here's the real question. What does it mean that we have to tell stories about actors aging as though they're tragedies? What does it say about how we value people, how we value artists, that reaching 60 or 65 is framed as a loss rather than as a transition? Firth has found a way to remain working, to remain respected, to remain professional. But the story of his career, from leading man to supporting actor, from the center of the industry to its margins, is also the story of what happens to talent when the industry stops needing what you uniquely offer. Stay with us. If this story resonated with you, if you're thinking about legacy, about aging, about how industries value people, let us know in the comments. What do you think Colin Firth should be doing now? Do you think the industry is making a mistake by sidelining serious actors as age? Or is this just the nature of how entertainment works? Like, subscribe, and keep watching for more stories about the people you thought you knew and the industry forces that shape their lives in ways we rarely see.